When students hear of the concept of hibernation and its similar partner, torpor, they often think that the reason why organisms have to do hibernation is because it gets so wicked cold out. It's the only way they can survive. And actually, it has nothing to do with the temperature. And you'll see that, in fact, torpor, which is a form of hibernation that organisms do regardless of the temperature, really underscores that concept. So the reality is, what is it? Why do organisms do this thing called hibernation? And why is it tied to the winter, typically? Well, let's take a look at that. It has everything to do with this: food availability. Now, of course, in the winter, food becomes scarce because the primary producers, the plants, are no longer producing. And if they're not producing, then the little critters that eat those primary producers don't have anything to eat, and the larger things that eat those little critters have nothing to eat too. So the reason why organisms go into hibernation is because there's no food available, and they need to shut themselves down so that they don't demand the food, since the supply is so incredibly low. So it's really about this: making the best of a bad situation. So, what do organisms do? The only way that you can shut down your demand for food is to shut down your body. And that's exactly what happens. In a sense, they go to sleep, but it's more than just sleeping. You lower your metabolic demands tremendously. Just to give you a sense of what I mean by lowering this metabolic demand, there was this paper that was, I don't even know when it was written, but it was about hibernation, and they did some studies on organisms and found that during the time sort of outside of hibernation, which is end of March all the way through to early November, animals during that time were doing their normal thing: collecting food, reproducing, hunting, hiding, etc. And if you compared that metabolic rate during that time to the metabolic rate when they're doing the hibernation, it turns out that they use about 35% of the oxygen that they used in during the normal time of the year when they're actually hibernating in the January months. So if you compare, let's say, January to August, the organism that was in January was using only 35% of the oxygen that it was using in August. Crazy. The tricky thing with hibernation, however, is not so much going into the hibernating state. So when you drop into hibernation, it doesn't take a lot of energy. Obviously, you're stopping your body from demanding oxygen. Oh, shoot. Hold on just a second. Sorry, I had to take a phone call there. So when you drop into hibernation, it doesn't take very much energy on the part of the organism. So in other words, it's worth it to go into hibernation if you don't have food around. However, the flip side is that to come out of hibernation requires a ton of energy, because it's not just sort of warming the body up. You actually have to overshoot your energy demands to sort of warm the body up. And so it demands a huge amount of energy. So there is a cost to doing hibernation, but clearly the cost to warm up is much less than the cost of allowing yourself or forcing yourself to stay in a normal state throughout the winter where you don't have any energy because there's no supply of energy for you. All right, so here's a picture of a ground squirrel hibernating, and the nutty thing about this is that the ground squirrel can actually have its body temperature go to 0 degrees C. So it's essentially, for all the world, if you were to pick up the ground squirrel at this point, you would think it was dead, because it would be cold, it wouldn't be moving, you wouldn't be able to hear a heartbeat or see any breathing, because it can lower its temperature. The thing that's a bummer, though, about being a ground squirrel is you can't just stay like that all winter, because you start building up toxins in your body. So periodically throughout the winter, the ground squirrel and most hibernators need to wake themselves up, which again takes a huge investment of energy to do that, and then they wake themselves up and pee and poop and do all the things they need to do, maybe even actually get some food, and then they put themselves back into the hibernation event. The scary thing about that is that the ground squirrel can actually starve to death in the process of awakening itself. If it hasn't laid down the fat reserves that it needed to do prior to undergoing hibernation, it'll actually run out of energy to arouse itself, and therefore it will not arouse itself, and it ends up dying. Kind of a scary situation. Anyway, I don't want to give you too much more information here because I want you to watch those videos that I provided for you that give you a sense of how infrequently these things breathe and how infrequently their heart beats as well. Torpor, which is the other piece that we need to talk about, is just simply a form of hibernation that takes place, torpor, am I spelling that right? Takes place over the course of a day rather than over the course of a year. So there are some organisms that must undergo torpor in order to survive the cold nights, where it's much harder for that organism to be able to find the food that it needs, or during really dry periods, hot periods during the day, when it's impossible for it to go out and find food because it's so blazing hot that it would lose a lot of water in that process. All right, so torpor and hibernation are essentially the same thing. You need to make sure that you shut yourself down when there's no food, whether that's because there's no food available since it's wintertime, or it's impossible for you to go and get the food because it's nighttime or it's too stinking hot. All right, enjoy the videos. They're pretty cool. Bye.